Before we do start today's video, I do want to mention that I do not intend on criticizing anyone's candidate's performance in this video. I watched every single game at the candidates and I was nothing but impressed by every player who played, their preparation, and their overall ability. What we are going to do today is look at my candidates' predictions, which I made 2 months before the candidates even started. And we're going to see how accurately I was able to predict the tournament. And yes, this is the same candidate's prediction that Hikaru Nakamura made a full-length video on his YouTube channel criticizing and calling completely stupid. So the title of this video and many comments I make during this video will reflect back on that. Throughout the video, I'll reference my original video in case you guys missed it, but enough talking, let's get into the predictions. Bluebaum's failure to dominate players in this ELO range leads me to believe he won't be able to do it in the candidates either, where the stakes will be a lot higher and the opponents will be a lot stronger. His performance in the European Teams Championship left more to be desired too. I won't list off all the results, but I'll put a screenshot on screen of his performance. These results just don't look like they're from a player who's going to cause problems at the next candidates. With all this being said, I do think that Bluebaum is going to be a solid candidates player. I think he's going to be a difficult player to get past, and he will get some draws against some of the top players in the tournament. However, I just can't see him winning many games, and I think he'll finish towards the bottom of the overall standings, putting him in the C tier. I know that this view kind of spoils the standings for the whole candidates, but I feel like if you didn't know who won the candidates yet, I don't know what you're doing watching this video, but as I predicted, Matthias Bluebaum had a decent tournament. I thought that he was going to pick up draws against very high-rated players. I didn't think he would finish bottom, but I thought he would finish towards the bottom, and he ends up finishing 6th, or tied 6th basically. Prague only finished below him on tiebreaks, but you can see also, once we switch to this tab, he definitely picked up some draws against some very strong players. That's kind of all he did during the tournament. No, but I think that Matthias was always going to be one of those grandmasters that was very difficult to get past, especially because he's not been on the scene for too long, so people, you don't know exactly what to expect against someone like Matthias. He was in very good form going into this candidates as well, and he proved to be a very difficult player to get past, and a player that only 2 players, Fabiano Caruana and Anish Giri, were able to beat. I feel like that's all I even need to say about Bluebaum, because he just drew like every game he played, so let's go into the next prediction. So whilst I do think Esipenko is a very strong player, historically, players who qualify through the World Cup don't perform too well. He's easily the weakest of the 3 that did qualify like this, so I think he belongs in the D tier. So we're 2 for 2 so far, which is pretty good. Andriy Esipenko did end up finishing dead last, and I thought this was really obvious, and I'm not sure why so many people predicted Matthias Bluebaum to finish dead last and not Esipenko. I thought that it was very clear, and this was, by the way, my prediction was 2 months before the candidates even started. Esipenko just didn't have many good tournaments. Not only did he qualify through the World Cup, which is usually not a good indicator, and I know Sindarov did win the candidates through the World Cup, but he is the exception, not the rule. I think the last person to actually perform well in the candidates after qualifying through the World Cup was Sergei Karyakin, and I think 2014 or 13, I can't quite remember the year. But Andriy Esipenko just didn't have any great tournaments. I don't think his World Cup tournament was that good either. And the problem and what the difference is, I thought, between Andriy Esipenko and someone like Matthias Bluebaum was that everyone knew Esipenko. Everyone's, he's a very young grandmaster still, but everyone is familiar with him, and that's not an advantage. If everyone knows your chess, knows your openings, knows what you play because you've been on the scene for so long, which Andriy Esipenko has, that is a real disadvantage going into something like the candidates. And we can see here, I don't really want to call anyone a free win because that's a very, very kind of mean thing to say, but he was kind of a free win to anyone that was really challenging to win the candidates. So Sindarov, you can see Anish Giri over here, Wei Yi, who had a great back half of the candidates in my opinion, Wei Yi again, and then Fabiano Caruana. So he wasn't losing to kind of everyone in the tournament, but if somebody was really, really gunning to win the candidates, those were the players that he was kind of a free win to. But 2 for 2 so far, and let's see the next prediction, which was really not so good. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I feel that Sindarov is a combination of the good between Bluebaum and Esipenko. Like Esipenko, Sindarov played a very respectable Grand Swiss, finishing on 6.5 out of 11, and going undefeated in the tournament. Again, I won't rattle off all of his results, I'll just put them on screen here, but I think this is just a decent tournament. What really impressed me about Sindarov was his performance in the Uzchess Cup Masters in July this year, where he got some big wins against some really tough opponents that are reminiscent of the caliber of players he'll verse in the candidates. He beat Jan Nepomniachtchi, Richard Rapport, Chitambaran Aravind, whilst also drawing to Parham Maghsoodloo, Nodebek Yakuboev, Arjun Aragaisi, and Nodebek Abdusatorov. His only loss in the tournament came to Pragg Ananda. Again though, like Esipenko, I don't think the recent World Cup is a great indicator of how he'll perform in the candidates. Although he decisively beat Nikita Petrov, Nicholas Theodoru, and Frederick Svein, those are all grandmasters that fall short of those he'll need to face in March next year. So to try and not be boring with this tier list and give some kind of reasoning behind my predictions, I'm going to put Sindarov into the B tier. I'm honestly not even mad about this prediction, because how could you have possibly predicted it? I think the only person who I think actually predicted Javokhir Sindarov to win, and not just this dark horse cop-out that you can say. I see so many grandmasters saying, oh, this guy's a dark horse, this guy... You can't call everyone a dark horse, right? There is one dark horse, and even if you say someone is a dark horse, it's a little bit of a cop-out. They're either going to win or they're not. So I think Anand was one of the only people to genuinely give Sindarov odds of winning, and he predicted like a day before the tournament started. So I don't think, especially because I made my predictions so far in advance, there was no real way that I was going to be able to accurately predict Sindarov winning. I think if I predicted a week before the candidate started, I might have put him in the A tier. I would never have predicted him to win though. You could have given me the tournaments, the first 3 games in, and I still wouldn't have predicted him to win. But I mean, what a tournament. 10 wins, or 10 points out of 14. That is historic. That is absolutely insane. We can see his overall standings here and his games. That is ridiculous. That is absolutely insane. A win against Andriy Esipenko, a draw against Bluebaum, win against Pragg, win against Fabi, win against Nakamura, win against Wei Yi. That is ridiculous. And, it probably would have, if somebody was really pushing him, and really pushing him towards the end, which no one really did in the end, a lot of these draws probably would have been wins too. It's no surprise that these draws came at the end of his tournament where he didn't really need to win anymore. So, especially if somebody was pushing him until the very end, I wouldn't be surprised if there would be a couple more wins in this back half of the tournament. So I'll put my hands up and say that this was not the greatest prediction. I'm not sure how I could have predicted it. I think one thing that I was thinking of during the candidates was the methodology that I actually used to predict these tournaments doesn't really account for people like Sindarov. They kind of, I used statistical data of tournaments to go back through the years of how they've performed recently and how they've performed all this time ago. And Sindarov is one of those players, kind of like Matthias Bluebaum, where they've not been on the scene really long enough to get a really good gauge of how good they might be. So there's always kind of that room for variables, and that variable just happened to be Javokhir Sindarov having the best candidates performance we've ever seen. So this was probably my worst prediction out of the whole list, which I don't mind. I think, if I'm going to get something wrong, it may as well have been this one that nobody would have gotten right. But yeah, let's get into the next prediction. In all honesty, I could have put Wei Yi in the D tier with Esipenko. Nothing about the way that he's played classical chess lately has wowed me at all. But his current elo and the fact that he's ranked 9th in the world is what's putting him into the C tier as opposed to the D tier. Call me crazy, but I actually don't hate this prediction. Wei Yi finished 1.5 points ahead of Matthias Bluebaum, who I'd also put in the C tier, but I think what really makes me not regret this prediction is how the dynamic of the tournament changed in the back half when Sindarov had already won. And we can look at the first half of Wei Yi's candidates tournament, where he didn't really play so well. He played Bluebaum with a draw, Pragg with a draw, lost to Fabi, drew against Nakamura, which very easily could have been a loss to Nakamura, drew against Anish Giri, lost against Sindarov, and then he won against Esipenko. And then the back half, where nobody could really catch Sindarov, and I feel like, and maybe people will get mad at me for saying this, I feel like everyone gave up. I feel like at the halfway point of this tournament, everyone that was chasing Sindarov really gave up. Nobody took big risks to win, and nobody was really gunning for wins in the back half of the tournament as much as they were in the first half. So I think that led Wei Yi to get a lot of games, and he didn't lose in the back half of the tournament, where he could just get draw, and then he got a win against Esipenko. So I think that, Wei Yi's tournament here was a little bit stat padded just because of the fact that I feel like so many players gave up. I know people won't like me accusing grandmasters of doing that, but I mean, we'll get to those players when it comes up, where I do think a lot of them gave Wei Yi and players like Wei Yi a really easy game and a really easy draw because they weren't really interested in winning the tournament anymore because they felt it was so far out of their reach that they were more concerned with just having a decent tournament and not losing games. Regardless though, it's very important to note that's not Wei Yi's fault. Wei Yi didn't give up. And credit to him, unlike the other grandmasters who were kind of just happy to get draws, happy to do this, happy to do that, Wei Yi never gave up, and he also got a win in the back half of that tournament as well. And not to mention, he didn't have a terrible first half of the tournament. It was not terrible. He maybe would have finished on a point or a point and a half less, which would have put him in the C tier, which would have made my prediction accurate. So he definitely didn't have a bad tournament by any means. But the most important thing is he never gave up on his tournament, and he ended up having a very respectable points total in the end. Anish Giri's form indicates the type of player that might just win the entire tournament. He's currently on a 52-game undefeated streak in classical chess. He's not farmed any tournaments in his home country to achieve that record either. He's been playing serious opponents for the entirety of 2025, and every time he plays a Super Grandmaster, he delivers with at least a draw. Usually draws against those top players won't be enough in the candidates, but if he can skip by players like Fabiano with a draw and find ways to win against the weaker half of the field, he's genuinely my favorite to win the tournament overall. It genuinely depends on the type of Anish Giri that we get come March. Will we get the Anish Giri that settles for draws when there's still room to push? Or will we see the Anish Giri that knows this candidate is his best chance at a World Championship match? For me, assuming we get the latter, Anish belongs in the S tier. Don't you just love being right? I saw so many people completely write off Anish Giri in this tournament. I saw him in the C tier in a lot of people's tier lists, and it's completely insane to me that you would ever put someone like Anish Giri in the C tier when he's in such good form. I mean, his winning streak did end. I think that ended before the candidate started, and maybe had I predicted this tournament, a week out from the candidates, maybe I would have put him in the A tier just because of his form. His form was a lot better when I predicted it, so, that's in defense of people that predicted the candidates just a week before it started. He was in a little bit of worse form, but he is still such a strong player, and he did perform quite well. I mean, he finished on 8.5 points, so if Sindarov didn't play as well as he did, he would have won the tournament, which justifies me putting him in the S tier, I think. This was such a weird game, this first game against Pragg, where I watched this game, I watched all of the games, of course, where this is the Grand Prix opening, where he just got completely outplayed in this game, but it's so respectable and so insane how well he was able to kind of bounce back from that. And yes, he did get a lot of draws, but he also did get a lot of wins against really tough opponents. And to go and lose your first game against Pragg and then win against him in the return leg is so respectable. He won against Fabiano Caruana, he won against Andriy Esipenko, so he got good wins, and he ended up winning against Matthias Bluebaum in the last game as well. I know it didn't matter so much in the last game. The candidates was kind of wrapped up in the 13th round, but I mean, he had a great tournament, and I predicted him to have a great tournament. Very happy with this prediction. I think what happened here, a lot of people just don't like Anish Giri, and they let that blind how good of a chess player he actually is, and they wanted to kind of rate him lower than he actually deserved. I think I was able to just put that to the side and, ignore my personal opinions on players and just take how good they are at chess, and Anish Giri is an exceptional chess player, and he was always going to perform well at this candidates. I think at best, Pragg is a dark horse for the 2026 candidates. He's more than capable of beating players like Fabiano or Hikaru on his day, but the question is, will it be his day? I lean towards no more than yes, just based on his recent performances. Had the candidates come 6 months earlier, I think Pragg would be in for a real shot. But although I think he will perform decently, I don't think he's going to win it. I think Pragg belongs at the top of the B tier, unlucky not to be in the A tier. I think overall this was an okay prediction. I think all of my predictions in a way look a little bit bad because I didn't predict Sindarov to win and he did end up winning, but Pragg ended up finishing 7th. It looks worse than it is. It's technically 6th because he tied with Bluebaum on points, but he just didn't have a great tournament. I think my prediction is good compared to other people's expectations of Pragg. A lot of people had him in the A tier, in the S tier, and had him as a real contender to win, and he just never was. It's a weird case as well, because he did win that first round, and then he just didn't look like winning again. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I genuinely can't think of a single moment or a single game where I really thought, yeah, Pragg's going to pick up a win here. It just didn't happen, and he picked up a couple of losses as well. We look at players like Bluebaum and players like Anish Giri, who just rarely lost. But there's a loss here to Sindarov, a loss here to Giri, a loss here to Sindarov, and I know they are respectable players to lose against, but if you're going to lose against players like that, you got to pick up wins against players like Andriy Esipenko, players like Bluebaum, players like Wei Yi, who I think are the easier kind of players to get wins against. So a very respectable win against Anish Giri, but just a really overall poor performance for Prague standards at least. And I kind of stand by what I said. If the candidates came 6 months earlier than it did, I think he would have played a lot better. He was just out of form leading up to this candidates, and he was out of form in the candidates too. So I think it was not a bad prediction. Maybe a C tier would have been a little bit more accurate. But yeah, not a bad prediction at all. Moral of the story is, nothing suggests that Fabiano Caruana is going to be this untouchable player in the 2026 candidates. I do think he's one of the favorites to win, but I see a lot of similarities between him and Anish Giri going into this tournament. With all that being said, I do think that Fabiano Caruana still belongs in the S tier. I feel like these predictions are not so bad. I did say that Fabiano Caruana, there was nothing suggesting he was going to be this untouchable player. I said that him and Anish Giri, I thought were going to have very similar tournaments, and they did. It's just that there was a Sindarov at the tournament that was blocking Fabiano's way. I really thought it was Fabiano's year as well. I remember on the FIDE Instagram, they had like these little whiteboards, and they would make the grandmasters answer all these questions. And on Fabiano's, it said, "What's something that you want to achieve this year?" or something along those lines. And then he said, "World champion." And he didn't win the candidates. So I really thought it was going to happen. It just didn't. I remember watching the first game between him and Sindarov, and it was this move. And as soon as Fabiano played this move, and I saw the evaluation go to plus 1.1, and I looked at all of the lines myself, I was like, yeah, he's going to lose now, isn't he? And I think this is just where it all went wrong. I think that if this was a draw, I think that, it would have been a lot closer. I think that Fabiano would have actually continued to kind of press in this tournament and really kind of push Javokhir Sindarov, but I think once he had this first loss, it was just a massive hit to his confidence, and he wasn't really able to recover. We can look at his standings here, or his games here. He had that first win against Hikaru, a draw against Anish, which is a big draw, by the way. A win against Wei Yi, a big win for a player that ended up playing pretty well. And then this loss to Sindarov, he bounced back pretty well, got a draw. But it was around this point where he was probably thinking, damn, I'm playing some good chess right now. Yes, I did lose to Sindarov, but I'm still playing well. Bounced back with a win, 2 draws, and you look over at the other boards, and it's just Sindarov winning every game. And you probably think around round 7, how on earth do I compete with this? Gets in your head a little bit, and then you lose to 2 very strong players, draw 4 in a row, and then end up with a win. I think that very unlucky for Fabiano Caruana. I don't think it's a hit to his legacy at all. I think that he is still one of the best players to never win a world championship. He's one of the most consistent players I've ever seen watching chess. But yeah, it's just a little bit unfortunate for Fabiano. What is interesting, though, is a lot of people laughed at my predictions when I said that Fabiano isn't this untouchable player, and nothing suggests that he's actually going to, be this 100% odds player of winning. A lot of people had Fabiano and no one else in the S tier and thought that he was going to win outright. I was one of the few people that were saying, Fabiano, it's not nailed on, it's not guaranteed, and he didn't end up winning. So I think this is a good prediction, and let's get into the next one. If you want my honest opinion, I just don't see it happening for Hikaru at this candidates. I said the same thing last candidates when Alireza Firouzja was farming people for rating just to qualify for the candidates. It doesn't seem like the kind of mentality that wins you the tournament. Of course, though, this is Hikaru Nakamura, and to write him off would be stupid, so obviously I won't. And even though I don't think he'll win the candidates, I still predict him to finish in the top 3. For that reason, I'm going to put Hikaru into the A tier. Maybe if he played a little bit more chess in 2025, it would be easier to see him winning the candidates. But I also feel historically, when players abstain from playing chess, they tend to underperform when it matters. Think Ding Liren trying to defend his world championship title after not really playing for an entire year. Or Fabiano Caruana at the candidates in 2024 after not really playing for half a year before that. All of those reasons that we just listed is exactly why Hikaru doesn't quite fit into the S tier. This was definitely not one of my best predictions. I think comparatively to other people who, ranked and rated Hikaru a lot higher and spoke a lot more highly about Hikaru Nakamura, it was a decent prediction, but, when we actually look at the standings, he ended up finishing 5th. He was not close to contending. He was 2 points off of Anish Giri in 2nd, and he was 3.5 points off Javokhir Sindarov in 1st. So he didn't have the greatest tournament. He only finished half a point above someone like Matthias Bluebaum, who didn't win a single game. And Hikaru Nakamura is one of those players that I felt gave up. I felt like Hikaru gave up. I think at a certain point, we can look at his games here. Of course, losing to Fabiano, it sucks, but Fabiano's a great player. There's no shame in losing to someone like Fabiano. A draw here, a draw here, a draw here. These are tough opponents. Maybe you could argue, should be winning against Esipenko, maybe should be converting that win against Wei Yi. But losing to Sindarov, not, nothing to be ashamed of again. And then some other draws, draw, and a win. So, it's not like he was playing badly, but I think, like other players, like Fabiano maybe, when you see how many points Sindarov is on, you kind of just go, yeah, I'm not winning this anymore. There's no chance of me winning. Even though, you're on a respectable amount of points, I don't think that usually by round 8, if you're on this amount of points as Hikaru, the tournament is not completely written off. There's still a long way to go, but I think when you see how many points Sindarov is on, you do kind of write off the tournament, and it goes into damage control. And I think these two games are good examples where, this was one of the fastest draws in Candidates history. I think barring there was a game with Jan Nepomniachtchi, which is a very fast draw, I think that was a little bit faster. But this one, not just was it a fast draw, and it was against, the leader, so it's not a weird game for someone to want to draw in. But it was just the nature of the game and the way that the players kind of went into the line with opposite color bishops and symmetrical pawn structures that it was very obvious that these two players wanted to draw out of this game and nothing else. And then I also thought this game against Wei Yi was kind of the same. Yes, it wasn't as fast as the other one, but it was very clear to me that neither player really looked like they wanted to win this game. And, we get a draw by repetition where you can see Wei Yi barely used any of his time up until move 19, and the game only went until move 22. So I feel like if the dynamic of Sindarov being on so many points kind of changed the tournament and the standings a lot, where I think Hikaru would have played better than Wei Yi, he would have finished higher, he would have finished 4th, if he just had more incentive to keep playing for wins. I think that's what it comes down to. So I think that my prediction was not terrible. It wasn't as good as it could have been. Again, it looks worse with Sindarov winning because I could never have foreseen that. But generally, I think that my prediction for Hikaru Nakamura was just okay. And those were all of my candidates' predictions completed. I've put them all into a nice little table for you guys to see. A nice little color-coded table with my best predictions being Andriy Esipenko and Matthias Bluebaum. I have kind of messed with it a little bit because technically Matthias Bluebaum finished a little bit higher, but he was tied on points with Pragg. Of course, there was a tiebreak, but generally I feel that if we're talking in the context of a candidate's prediction like this, we can just say that they finished at the same kind of ranking, because they did. They finished on the same amount of points, and I think when you finish 6th in a tournament, tied 6th, I don't really care about tiebreaks anymore. So we got those pretty much bang on, Andriy Esipenko and Matthias Bluebaum. We got Wei Yi 2 placements off, where he finished a little bit higher. Of course, this was again swayed by the dynamic of the tournament, where Javokhir Sindarov kind of just ran away with it, and the rest of the players that would otherwise try and keep up with Javokhir didn't really seem like they were too interested in doing that, or just weren't able to. So they weren't able to kind of give players like Wei Yi, who otherwise would have had much tougher games, they gave him a little bit of a day off in some cases, where he was able to get easy draws against tough players, and then he was able to focus all of his energy on getting the points against players like Andriy Esipenko, who Wei Yi did win against twice, I believe. Javokhir Sindarov, of course, my worst prediction of the lot, with -4. I predicted him to finish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th, and he finished 1st. So I don't think that was a terrible prediction for the time. Again, if I predicted this tournament a week out, I probably would have put in here where Rameshbabu is. I would have swapped them around. So again, my prediction would have been a little bit better had I predicted it closer towards the actual candidates. But I still think, a week out from the candidates, I was not giving him better odds of winning than someone like Hikaru Nakamura. I just wouldn't really think of it. I think that him finishing 4th would have been a great achievement for him, but let alone him finishing 1st. And then Hikaru, we got 2 placement points off. Fabiano, we got 1 off, and Anish Giri, we also got 1 off. So I feel like these were respectable predictions in the end. I was heavily criticized for my predictions because I'm not a grandmaster and because I have no idea how the candidates worked. And of course, everyone knows that if you don't play in the candidates, your opinion means nothing. In fact, if you're not a grandmaster, your opinion means nothing, and you're low IQ, and you should stop making YouTube videos. That's just the rule of thumb on YouTube, really. But I hope you all enjoyed my candidates prediction reaction video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below who you thought was going to win, if you think my predictions were any good, and anyone else's predictions that you thought were good or bad. Let me know in the comments below. But I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you all in the next one.